Hello everyone, how are you doing? I hope that you are doing so very well. Today it's time to wrap up those books I read in August. I honestly cannot believe another month is come and gone. They're going so fast right now. Soon it's gonna be 2016. What is life? I read 9 books in the month of August, which I think is pretty good considering my sister was in town for a week of it and one of these books was giant. So 9 is a pretty decent number. The first book that I read was The Shadow Society by Marie Rutkowski. Overall, I enjoyed this. It wasn't perfect, but it was really good. The story and the plot are so interesting and so engaging, and I'm not gonna say exactly what it is because that would spoil the surprise of the book. It's not what you expect it to be. Con and Darcy are the main characters and they just grow and change throughout this book so much, and it's so wonderful to see some good character development there. The world building is great. The plot did drag at a couple points. It was kind of like, okay, when are we gonna get to something a little bit better, a little bit more interesting? But besides that, not too many critiques here. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was The Named by Marianne Curley. I read this for #5faves, which is technically over now, but I didn't have time to read one of my faves, so hopefully I will be reading it this month. So since this was for 5faves, it was a reread, and I hadn't read this in a couple years, so I was really hoping it was gonna like live up to that expectation I had, and it wasn't as good, unfortunately. The world and the idea behind this story were still so on point. Such an interesting concept, fighting against the goddess of chaos and trying to make sure history stays the same and going back in time. That is so cool still. But the characters are a lot younger than I remember, and I don't know if that was the issue, but like some romance things that are a little bit creepy, and the writing was so bad. I just had to push my way through it because I love the story, but the writing was really bad. So I had to take this down from a 5 to a 3.5. I still really enjoyed it, but I could not get over the writing and the characters. The next book that I read was The Accident Season by Moira Fowley Doyle. I was sent an arc of this book by Penguin, so thank you Penguin for sending me that. This book had an interesting concept and really pretty writing, even though it takes quite a bit to get used to it, but I just did not enjoy it a lot. The characters are alright, the plot and the writing is pretty good, and the ending is really good, but at the same time, it was just really similar to a lot of other books that I've read, like a combination of a couple different books that I've read, and I was like, oh, I don't really want to say what those books are because that would give away the twists. It was just kind of for me. There also are some triggering things in this book. I don't want to say what triggering things because that would spoil it as well, but if you are triggered by certain things and you are interested in knowing what the triggers are for this book, leave me a comment down below and I will reply or private message you or do the spoiler enter down a bunch of times thing. The book also just kind of felt like it was trying to be a bunch of different books and then all combine them into one and then like wrap everything up cleanly at the end, and it just didn't really work for me. I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. The hype surrounding this book was a little bit insane, so I was really hesitant to read it. But then I got the audiobook from Overdrive and listened to it with one of my friends on the way to Kansas City, and we were both hooked. It blew my expectations out of the water. It was so good. The characters were really great. The story was really interesting. The world building was kind of like, could have been beefed up a lot more. There were just some things that were not totally there for me. There were some really like contrived, overused plot devices that are used, but sometimes I love those overused plot devices. I'm just like, yes, I know you. Overall, really enjoyed it. Even though it was overhyped a little bit for me, still really enjoyed it. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Speak by Lori Halse Anderson. This is an older book, but it is so important. I'm gonna start off the bat saying trigger warning for rape, a little bit for self-harm, so if those things make you uncomfortable, skip this section, go on to the next book. The writing was really great, and I liked Melinda as a main character, but there were just a lot of parts that were kind of boring to me, and I was like, okay, this is very important, and I'm glad this book is written, but it's just not totally there for me as like a whole story. Her journey is really interesting to watch, and to see her finally speak out about things, so important. There need to be a lot more books like this. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was The Winter's Curse by Marie Rutkowski. I was downtown with my friend just kind of like walking around, and then we went into the library that's down there, and then I saw this on the YA wall. I've heard good things about it, but I was like, should I get it? I have other books I need to be reading, but then I was like, no, I'm just gonna go get it, and I am so glad that I did. I read this book and the next book in like 36 hours, something ridiculous like that. Oh, it just blew my mind, blew me out of the water. The story is so interesting, and so are the characters, and just like the concept of everything, and just so good. My heart was breaking in in this book so many times. The first half of this book is really good, but the second half of this book is so good. That's where it really shines, where like politics come into play and it's just, oh my gosh. And the end, I cannot. This book is just as good as everybody said it was. I think I gave this like a 4.8, but just like really close to a 5. Not totally a 5 because there were still a few things that I'm like, oh no, but so close. Please read this book. I want everybody to read this book. The next book that I read, you guessed it, is The Winner's Crime by Marie Rutkowski. I am so glad that they had this at the library when I was just finishing up The Winner's Curse because I needed it so badly. This book was also heartbreaking. I don't know which one is more heartbreaking. They're both heartbreaking in their own right. There's also a lot more politics in this book, and Kestrel has to make a lot of different decisions, and I just really like Kestrel a lot. But this book, seriously, like, as heartbreaking as it was, it also like stressed me out. Definitely towards the end, like in the last 5 chapters, there were times where I was just like reading it and I had to stop and just like put it down for a second because I was so stressed out. My heart was beating so fast and I was like, oh my gosh. And I just had to like chill for a second so that I could regain my composure and keep reading. Though I love this, it feels like it's becoming like tragedy for tragedy's sake. Tragedy on tragedy on tragedy, and if my babies are not happy in the 3rd book, I'm going to go away from the series. So sad. I don't like just reading a book that's tragedy and tragedy with no happy ending. Give me a happy ending. You can have some tragedy mixed with a happy ending, but don't just give me tragedy and nothing else. I need some happiness. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This was my classic for the month. I really enjoyed this book a lot. I haven't read it since like middle school and it was so good. I don't really remember a ton of things about it. I just kind of knew, like I said in the last video, it's about a gang of boys doing stuff, hanging out. That's exactly what it was. I feel like the themes in this book are also very important and very needed. Even now, you don't need to have prejudice against people and think badly of them because at their core, people are the same. Doesn't matter where they're from, what they look like, who they are. People see people as people. The last third of this book, so many emotions. I was like, don't touch me. I am having so many feels right now. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. And the last book I read this month was This Monster, The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. I technically finished this on September 1st, but I read so much of it in the month of August that I am counting it as a freaking August book. I don't think that I quite like loved it so much, but I enjoyed it a lot. The story is really interesting, and Theo is a very great main character, really interesting to read, and he's not totally perfect, and you know, I love my flawed characters. Some adult books, they just have a lot of higher language and you're left reading it like, what does that mean? But this is really easy to understand from the get-go. It was really like, not simple, but not like over the top crazy language. I was totally immersed, totally interested in what the characters were doing and what was happening, but there were some things that I didn't really love. This book is really big. These pages are pretty thin, so you probably can't really tell, but this book is like 800 pages, and I feel like it could have been a couple hundred pages less than that. Especially in the middle, it just dragged so much, and not everything was totally essential. And though I liked Theo, he had a very bad case of nice guy syndrome. Like, why don't these girls all like me? I am nice guy. You are not entitled to someone liking you just because you like them. That's not how the world works. So those were some of the issues I had. It just wasn't like totally, oh my gosh, I love it so much for me, but it was really good. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And there you have it. The books that I read in the month of August. Let me know down below a book that you were pleasantly surprised by this month, something that you maybe didn't think much of, but then you read it and you were like, huh, that was good. I was so surprised. For me, that was The Winner's Curse. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Here we go. Having an existential crisis in the middle of my video. Good. Can you not walk? Oops. I think that's time for a thumbnail to be done.